what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm Cody Goodwin. Got the whole gang back together, which is to say Alex has rejoined the show after only being on once last week. Welcome back, man.
Well, thanks.
Along with Mike Rodak, we are here to discuss Alabama's 27-25 win over South Carolina, a very weird game in really all three phases. We're recording this on Sunday afternoon, about 24 hours removed from the final result. Guys, how are we feeling now that we're maybe a little bit more removed from the game?
Equally as pessimistic about this team's chances, which is not to say that I don't think they can be a good football team. I just don't see where the solutions come from because you're right. It's not just one phase, although the defense looks suspect. It's just a continuation when you talk about what happened against Vanderbilt. That one can be an aberration, two is the start of a trend.
Alex has a slingshot cocked back and ready to fire off some takes. Mike, how are you feeling 24 hours removed from the game?
Same. I mean, I think you were looking for Alabama to come out and prove to everybody that they were able to put together a good week of practice and treat the opponent seriously and do everything that people thought they didn't do well against Vandy, things that they thought they did do well against Vandy, but people on the outside did not think they do well. And it was sort of like, all right, let's prove it to everybody sort of game. And they didn't. And it looked like at first they were going to do it when they're up 14-0. And then, you blow a coverage for the touchdown and all these things that happened after that. You had the Caleb Odom penalty. It might have been Bray Hubbard wearing number 10. We'll have to, don't see on the TV copy. You'd have to see who's wearing that on the game film, but you had that penalty, you had the Milrow intentional grounding, you had the Malachi Moore offsides, you had something that got screwed up with the timeouts and trying to figure out what they're doing at the end of the first half, and you have Milrow throw the pick, you have the field goal, you have the long drive they gave up in the second half in the third quarter, you have Bernard not going down. I mean, you got lucky with Sellers fumbling that handoff on that run when South Carolina was up 5 in the fourth quarter. It blew my brain yesterday so much that I can't even talk or think straight today. So it was just a strange game. It was a mind-numbing game, and it was everything but what Alabama should have done coming out of the Vandy loss. What I think people expected them to do, which is just show the world, all right, we're back. We messed around last week. We're not going to mess around this week. Well, guess what? You messed around again. You keep messing around, that's kind of who you are. That's a problem. But it feels so much further removed from that first quarter against Georgia, the deeper we go here.
27-25 was the final score. Alabama, this game had a lot of get-right qualities to it, right? Like, this was an opportunity to come home. You're playing a lesser opponent, 20-plus point favorite. Like, this was a chance. I know that there was some stylistic things that South Carolina was going to press them about, but you're playing a quarterback who really hadn't done a whole lot this season. So opportunity for the defense to maybe shore some things up, get after the passer, play a little bit more fundamentally sound football game, chance for the offense to a little bit of stress test there in the way of pass rush. How are you going to handle that? Can Milrow continue to play well? Everything just felt really hard in this game. Again, 27-25 was the final. Alabama took 14-0 lead. Looked like things were going fairly well. Blew the lead, right? They went into the fourth quarter, I believe, trailing 19-14. Ended up coming out on top. Right? It was 20-19. It looked like that was going to be the final score. Jeremy Bernard scores a touchdown. Like you mentioned, Mike, 27-19. South Carolina scores immediately after that, right? And they're within a possession, so they go for 2, miss it, recover the onside kick, heave toward the end zone. It's a poor throw. Damani Jackson intercepts it, runs the clock out. I don't know where we want to begin here. Alex, I'll tee you up, man. Where do you want to take this? I know you wrote the post-game column that there's cause for alarm.
Yeah.
Very, very strong column. What do you think is the biggest reason or the biggest concern in your eyes coming out of this game?
It's because I don't know the way out at this point. I don't know how you improve your personnel, or maybe it's your scheme, or maybe it's both on defense. I don't know where that answer comes from, because if you think Lenora Sellers is difficult and Rocket Sanders, Tennessee is going to eat your freaking lunch, because Dylan Sampson is a load and he can run the football. there are tougher opponents coming up. Like, that's the thing. And what I struggle with, I've seen how good Alabama can be. It wasn't that long ago. It was the first half against Georgia. It was the Wisconsin game. And, Cody, you brought it up. That game's looking better and better and better and better. They've shown what they can be when they're firing on all cylinders. How do you get back to that? Or is there enough film on you now that coaches say, hey, I know how to attack this. I know how to attack the defense. I know how to negate Milroe's legs. And then what do you have? It won't surprise me if they find a way out necessarily, because you do have talent at key positions, but I'm just left with not a lot of optimism for this team because of who they're going to face and what they've shown for the last 10 quarters. It's just a deep regression, and I don't think you can say it's focus. I don't think you can say it's, as simple as, talk less during the game. I know that's a familiar criticism now. I don't think that has anything to do with it. I just don't think they're good enough, and I don't think maybe they're coached well enough. And I don't know how you fix that.
And the second part is the scary one to me, because look, none of us really watched Kalen DeBoer all that closely when he was at Washington. Like, did any of us watch Washington every week? No. Did any of us watch Fresno State 3 years ago or 4 years ago? No. Like, and even Alabama players will tell you, like, and they've said it like publicly on podcasts, like someone had to look up who the hell he was when they hired him. And everybody saw the win-loss record and they saw all that, but nobody really truly knew, like, you never were watching Fresno State, San Jose State games like 4 years ago. Like, how did this guy manage in-game situations, like clock management, some of that stuff? Like, who did their homework on that? Like, I would hope Greg Byrne did, but I don't think like the general media, like fans, players, like really knew exactly what they were getting in Kalen DeBoer from that perspective. And it's been underwhelming so far, particularly you go back to even the Vanderbilt game. The illegal numbering penalty sticks in my craw because that's such an easy thing to fix. And A, you just don't have two players wearing the same number. Or B, you do the penny thing where the jersey they put on, like they do every damn kickoff and kickoff return, because they have Caleb Odom and Bray Hubbard both wearing 18. One of them puts on a 10 jersey. Same thing with Emmanuel Henderson puts on a 10 jersey, so they don't have two number 3s out there between him and Keon Sabb. And something broke down in the Vandy game. And it's so fixable if you have attention to detail. And in this game, there was multiple instances where the attention to detail was lacking. And the end of the first half scenario, I will give DeBoer a potential break from the standpoint of, I think the scoreboard was wrong. And it's something that Alex said to me in that moment when Alabama took that last time out with 10 seconds left in the first half after the second down sack. He said there was still one timeout left, but the score thing, I was looking on my computer and the official both said it was their last timeout. And everything that they said after the game, Milroe and DeBoer, indicated that they thought they had another timeout. And it would not have made sense in the world. I'll give Jalen Milroe credit. Like, there was no way in the world he would have thrown over the middle of the field to Cole Adams with 10 seconds left and no timeouts, because you're just giving the half away. Cole Adams isn't going to run 50 yards for a touchdown. And you look at some of the other routes they were running, CJ Dupree was running to the left flat. Jeremy Bernard was cutting across the field. That play call was not a Hail Mary play call. Kalen DeBoer was setting up for a 4th down Hail Mary play call, which is what he said. And so they seem to be operating under the standpoint of they had another timeout. They would try to cut the field in half, as Milroe said. They would try to make it a more manageable Hail Mary. They throw to the end zone. The reason why they let the clock run down was to not leave any time on the clock for South Carolina. But you didn't have that timeout. And the fact that it seems like they were relying on the stadium scoreboard is a little bit concerning to me, because that is something where, look, we can roll our eyes about the comparisons to Nick Saban, but Nick Saban had an army of analysts, and I just don't see that having happened under Nick Saban because of the attention to detail and the ability to think out every little scenario. I just don't see them relying on the stadium scoreboard. So that's concerning to me. And then the Jeremy Bernard situation where it was set up in the press box when he scored a touchdown, like he should have gone down. And if it was set up in the press box by us slappies, then, you know, you have people that are being paid a lot more than us to have those sort of conversations with players. And it wasn't like it was a hurry up situation. It was the 2-minute warning before then. And you had a big powwow on the field. And that's something that you should have thought through. And none of that would have ever happened. You can blame the defense for letting them go down the field and score. You can blame the onside kick unit, but none of that would have happened if Bernard just went down. You take 3 knees and the game is over. So yes, all that stuff behind that happened after that was concerning, but it would never have happened. And I don't necessarily blame Jeremy Bernard. I think it would have been nice if he had the foresight and the heads up play on his own to do it. But I asked him after the game, what was communicated to you by the coaches? And he said nothing about that. He said, I just walked in the end zone and scored. So it's the attention to detail that concerns me. And you kind of get that sense from his personality. And it's just not, and we knew this from the start, it's just not quite as locked in as Nick Saban is. The intensity was never there with Kalen DeBoer, and that can be a good thing in certain arenas. I think players appreciate it. But then you get into situations like this, and that's a red flag to me. You know, these things start to stack up a little bit. And there's other instances that just haven't made a whole lot of sense. And some of the penalties too that they've taken that seem like correctable errors. It's just, and there's been a lot of those too. Like go back to the Georgia game. They had 2 4th downs that Georgia converted on penalties. You had the Vandy Q Robinson play, hands to the face. You had Jihad Campbell with the same penalty in this game. And then you had Q Robinson again. Was it a face mask, I think, towards the end of the game that extended that drive? It's like, and yes, some of that stuff happened under Saban too. Like there's a lot of penalties recent years in some games, but like Saban in the situational football always had those meetings before the games. You can go ask any of his former coaches. Like they went through every little scenario. I'm not in on those meetings with Kalen DeBoer. I just don't picture him personality wise being quite as detail oriented. And I think this is where he gets burned on some of that stuff.
See, I'm going to now go from hypercritical to being maybe accused of a Kalen DeBoer apologist. And Mike and I have talked about this before. I understand the perception of being slightly aloof with the way he deals with the media. I'm willing, though, to chalk that up as just not being a good communicator. Not every football coach is great in that environment. It's frankly, I think you could point to that. That's why he wears a T-shirt, because he doesn't think about those things. He just coaches ball. So I'm not willing to quite go that far yet in terms of trying to insinuate what's happening behind closed doors. It's not showing up on the field, and really that's all that matters. At the same time, I think that it is worth, I'm going to roll my eyes into the back of my head. It is worth stepping back and saying this is a first-year coach who got here in January. Like, at the end of the day, they're building the damn plane on the fly. You had all that roster management you had to do, and even that was happening during spring. So you didn't really – you had, like, to have this team together, you had a few months, 2-3 months, and then you started a season. And you're changing – as much as they've kept the same, you're changing terminology, faces, personalities. Everything's different. Does that excuse everything? No, obviously not. But it is the first year, and I do think that we lose sight of that because of the expectations around the team, the fact that they got to number 1, the fact that they beat Georgia. I think it painted a shiny coat on the exterior when what's behind that was maybe not completely a finished product yet. And that's something Kalen has said repeatedly. I don't think anybody wants to hear it, but they are a work in progress. That's why the thing that concerns me most this season is maybe not the coaching as much as the personnel. I just don't think they have enough dudes, specifically on defense. But I do think that element of, look, you don't want to hear it because it's Alabama and you think you should be competing for a national championship. It's the first year of a new coaching staff after the guy who was there before changed everything and dominated for almost 2 decades straight. Was very specific in the way he did everything. Now it's all different. Things can be a little bit shaky when those are the circumstances.
So you're saying Alabama's like a souffle. They're nice on the outside, but if you poke a knife in them, they deflate, and it's just a bunch of air on the inside.
That's not a bad – I mean, what we've seen the last 2 weeks.
There's your podcast title. Alabama is a souffle.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Mike.
And I would just say on that, if I'm Greg Byrne and I'm paying Kalen DeBoer $10 million, and I'm paying any coach $10 million, whoever I hired, I want that coach to bring over whatever you were doing at your previous stop. So whatever systems you had in place, bring me that. So at Washington, if you had a guy in the press box, in the coach's box, worrying about timeouts, if you had a guy, game management advisor to you, bring that guy, because I don't want you to have those same mistakes. I don't want you to have the learning curve at Alabama. Just bring that and put that in place. So he's a first-year coach at Alabama, but he's not a first-year head coach. And I think that might be an important distinction in this case, because he has been a head coach before for 4 years at the current level, Washington and Fresno State, and for a solid decade plus, right, at Sioux Falls. And so, not that at Sioux Falls you're going to have 10 analysts to, break down the color of spaghetti that you're eating, but like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, how many colors of spaghetti?
If you hadn't dropped the soufflé line, that would have been the podcast.
You were on a roll.
Soufflé and
You're like Alabama in the second half against Georgia. You were on it, and then
I'm just building the plan as I go here. But I think you have enough head coaching experience where I feel like you should have systems in place for this stuff. Like, it would be one thing if they had hired Pete Golding as their head coach, and Pete Golding's never been a head coach before. And then you can say, Pete needs to understand, he needs to have certain things in his brain in the fourth quarter under 2 minutes. Like, what are you doing in that situation? You've never been a head coach before. You never had to think about those things. I feel like DeBoer has enough head coaching experience where those things should be coming into his brain more quickly, or you have other people presenting those things to you when you need them. So to that extent, it's a little bit concerning, and it's a high level of ball. Like, and I said this when he first got hired 2 weeks after. I said, like, this is kind of a rebuilding project, because you're hiring a whole new staff. You have 2 new systems on either side of the ball. You had all the transfer portal losses that they had. You had the decommits. You had most of your class decommit. Like, it's a rebuilding project, kind of shrouded by Alabama Crimson and the expectation that you're going to go undefeated every year. And I agree, that expectation was lofty, but the way that they're losing games, and that's referencing Vandy, and the way that they played against South Carolina, the way they played for the second half plus of the Georgia game, is concerning. And it's kind of the bigger picture that I think people are getting at. And I agree that they might not have the personnel to fix it this year, but I'm not sure they will next year either. That's the issue to me, and that's something I wrote about today. Like, I don't know where the magic fix is on defense unless you were able to get a Justice Terry to come in. You damn well better keep Dijon Lee, who Georgia's coming after, your 5-star corner. So, like, you have a bunch of freshmen coming in next year. You're obviously going to be going into the portal to look at certain guys, but I don't know if we're sitting here next August and, going down the starting lineup for Alabama on defense and saying this is guaranteed to be a better group than what we're looking at right now. I just don't know if that's going to be the case.
I think the defense is probably a good place to start, because that has been a very, very popular topic of conversation, maybe an unpopular topic of conversation, at least on our board. Alabama's defense, 374 total yards of offense allowed to a South Carolina team that ranked 94th nationally in total offense, and also 14th out of 16 SEC teams in total offense coming into Saturday's game. They are led by a first-year starting quarterback, Lenora Sellers, who set all kinds of new career bests against this Alabama defense. You ready for this? 23 of 31 passing, 74% completion rate. That's a new career best. Threw for 238 yards. That's a new career best. Also threw for 2 touchdowns, which matched his season total coming into Saturday's game. Are you picking up on what I'm laying down here about Alabama's defense? Rocket Sanders also ran for 78 yards and a touchdown. Sellers hit, I believe, close to 10 different receivers. Look, I'll give Alabama's defense its flowers. Alabama's pass rush got after them a little bit. LT Overton finished with 9 total pressures. Alabama's defense, I believe, finished with 4 total sacks. They had 7 total tackles for loss. They did force 4 turnovers, 3 fumbles, and then that last gasp pick by Damani Jackson in the end zone. However, this is just not a performance that felt good. Alex, I'll let you take this off. Alabama's defensive performance. Thoughts? Go.
Mid. I mean, I don't know what word you want to put on it. They're close to being good. They're always close to being good. Like I feel like LT Overton's a great example of this. Flashes, gets into the face of the quarterback, and then sometimes just doesn't bring him down. And look, there should be another guy behind him to bring the guy down. But they're close to being good. Keon Sabb puts together a couple great games to start the season, then a little shaky. Malachi Moore does great things, and then not great things. Tim Keenan looks really good and then kind of falls off a little bit. They're just not owning the line of scrimmage. They're not playing consistently. They're getting gashed in the running game against teams that you know what they're doing. It's not it's no guess what South Carolina wants to do. It's no guess what Vanderbilt wants to do. It's no guess what South Florida wants to do. They want to run the damn ball. And you should be able to stop that, and they can't. It just concerns me again when you start talking about the teams left on the schedule, specifically the very next one in Tennessee and what they have in their running back room. So I guess if you want to be optimistic about the defense, you can find certain things. The 4 sacks were nice, but bottom line is they're just not getting the job done. They're not getting off the field. You see flashes on first and second down, but doesn't mean anything if you don't execute on third down. I think that's kind of where I'm at with them.
And, one of the things I think that maybe sold people on this defense coming into the year was Swarm D. They're going to force turnovers. They're going to have this vision coverage. Well, I'm looking right now, their interception stats. And that was one of the things. Like Kane would always say they're really highly ranked at Indiana with their interceptions. Well, Keon Sabb had 2 in the first quarter against Western Kentucky. Hasn't had any since. Damani Jackson had 1 at the end of the South Carolina game when they were heaving the ball up, which what the hell was Sellers doing on that? All they needed was a field goal, and he's heaving the ball to the end zone. Didn't make any sense what they were doing in that situation. Then you had Carson Beck intercepted on a last-ditch effort, the Zabian Brown thing. So really, all you had besides that was Damani and Jihad Campbell against Georgia.
Yeah.
Like, they're not even against bad quarterbacks. And I'm not going to call Diego Pavia a bad quarterback because he's not, but he's not going to be a first-round pick. Let's put it that way. Like, Carson Beck is the only true NFL quarterback that they've played so far. And for them to have the stats that they've had, and I ran through it today, where right now they're 55th in the country in yards allowed. That would be their lowest ranking since 1998. They've only played one top 50 offense, and that's Georgia. Otherwise, you have Western Kentucky was 66, South Florida is 104th, Wisconsin's 53rd, Vandy's 96, South Carolina is 92nd. TJ Finley, Byron Brown, Braden Locke, Diego Pavia, Lenore Sellers, other than Carson Beck. These next 3 games are going to be different. The way Tennessee is playing right now, I'm not even convinced that Tennessee is the hardest of those 3 games. The way LSU is playing, the way that Garrett Nussmeier is really starting to come along, the fact that LSU game could be at night, and Nick Saban has been banging that drum the entire year in the Pat McAfee show, how he feels like playing at LSU at night is something different, and he would know pretty damn well because he coached at LSU and he coached at Alabama. The fact that Alabama has to go to LSU that could be playing pretty well if they beat A&M here, that would almost concern me more than the Tennessee game right now. But the Tennessee game is the most immediate, and that still has a lot of concerns. Maybe it helps that Nico is regressing a little bit from where he was. I think he had a really good game against NC State earlier in the season. NC State, turns out they're not very good. Oklahoma, turns out they're not very good, maybe on defense. So what happened the last couple weeks against Florida and Arkansas are not great. He had a fumble, interception. He's taken 7 sacks the last 2 games. But their running game and their defense, especially Tennessee's defensive line, I think can erase some of what Nico might lack right now. And that's what would scare me the most about Tennessee, in addition to the crowd and the environment. So these next 3 games are going to be different. You have Tennessee's offense, which is still top 10. You have Missouri, which I would still have concerns about Luther Burden against the secondary. And then you have LSU, which Nussmeier's averaging 400 passing yards a game or something right now. So this is the season. You can talk about growth, and that's something even DeBoer, to your point, Alex, mentioned before the game. We only have 5 games together, is kind of what he said. Well, doesn't matter right now. They only have 6 games together because these next 3 games, particularly the next one, are what's going to decide your season. This is the time. It's right now. And you're not going to have time to grow this unit beyond this season. If you mess it up right now and you miss the playoffs, you lose 2 games out of the next 3, you're not making the playoff. And a lot of these guys are going to be gone on defense. You have 5 seniors that are out of eligibility. You have 11 players eligible for the draft. Of that, I'd say 3 to 5, I think realistically could go. So it's going to be a different group next year. And this whole idea of like, we're going to grow together and we're going to figure it out. Like, that's not how football works all the time. Things just keep moving and shifting and changing. And you kind of just gotta figure it out. And this is a time for them to figure it out, is this week.
I think the thing that's really frustrating about watching the defense is, and this is kind of to Alex's point earlier, we've seen how good they can be. Like Western Kentucky, whatever. But like South Florida, that's a prolific offense when they're fully healthy, and the defense did a really good job. I know they gave up a lot of run yards to Byron Brown, but they did a fairly good job of just keeping everything in front of them. We obviously saw the first half against Georgia. That Wisconsin win is looking better and better. Like that Wisconsin team is averaging almost 40 points a game since Alabama held them to 10. I understand that they had to switch quarterbacks that game, but clearly they had figured some things out, and Alabama did not allow them to do that. What's really frustrating is just like the consistent issues that just continue to crop up over and over and over again. There's penalties that allow teams to continue to move the chains that ultimately lead to touchdowns. They can't get off the field on 3rd and 4th down against Vanderbilt, against Georgia, again against South Carolina. They had 5 third down conversions on that opening drive of the second half. And they obviously had the 4th down, coverage bust on touchdown. And then that's the other thing too. There's been a coverage bust in each of the last 3 games. And it's like, okay, once, all right, that's, I get it. It happens. Not every secondary is perfect. But the fact that it has happened every single game and it's been somebody different every single game, the fact that it just keeps happening over and over and over again. And same thing with the penalties that erase opportunities to get off the field or lead to touchdowns for the opposition. And they're just making life harder on themselves. And it's really, really tough to watch. Like, I guess I'll pose this question to you guys. Of all of the things that we've talked about the defense, whether it's this game or the past 10 quarters, is it fixable? Like, are these things that can be shored up even with the most important stretch of their season coming up next?
I don't know that it can. And it's a conversation Mike and I had leaving the game yesterday. I wonder if the only path forward is to say, screw it, we're going to start winning games in shootouts and start just turning it. And look, that's not a thing a coaching staff's really going to say is, oh, I'm giving up on defense. I'm just going to, stop trying to score points. Of course they're trying to do that, but it might need to be a little bit of an identity shift because, again, the personnel doesn't seem to be quality enough, and the scheme doesn't seem to be fitting or working enough. And just one point on the Kane Womack thing. Look, I think he's a really smart guy. I don't think you get to the point you get without having really good qualities as a head coach. It just concerns me anytime a coach's worth on defense is attributed to turnovers. They'll never admit this. Turnovers are fluky. You cannot predict turnovers. You want evidence of that? Look who led the country in turnover margin a year ago. It was Michigan by a mile. They won the national championship. How well are they doing this year? TCU, way up there in turnovers games when they made it to the national championship game. Fell off the earth the next year. They didn't practice any differently. I guarantee you that. They have the same drills. Every coach does them. But you can't predict those things. So it's tough to talk about because you're going to get excited when they happen and upset when they don't. But that was always the thing with Kane. And again, I'm not writing him off saying this. It's just something that's kind of been in the back of my mind for a while now. So when you see the ball not bounce their way, which would make the defense look better, I think that's something that I keep returning to. It's just like, yeah, it's great you led the country in turnovers or wherever you ranked it, South Alabama, but I just don't know how that translates. I don't even know if it would translate if he was still at South Alabama.
The ball bouncing your way sparks another topic in my mind because I think people are getting a little bit perturbed at the way Kalen DeBoer is describing certain things, whether it's his in-game interviews, his post-game interviews. And I think fans that, again, are probably used to a certain level of perfection being demanded aren't exactly getting that vibe from Kalen DeBoer when everything is couched and in some cases downplayed after the Vanderbilt loss. And situations are kind of looked at a little bit overly optimistically or just in a way that seems to ignore certain facts and certain aspects. I don't think people are reacting well to some of his comments, even his post-game comments after the win when he went on ABC, the interview, and said there's just so many times you talk about finding a way to win. The ball wasn't bouncing our way, but when you find a way to win, the back is against the wall. Even on the last drive there, I'm proud of these guys. Well, because of all the things we talked about, the last drive only existed because of what you didn't do and go down. Like, you talked about creating your own breaks at halftime. Arguably, you created more breaks for Arkansas. Arkansas created a break for you with their fumble from Sellers on the second time. So I don't know if you created your own breaks. I don't know if that's a game where you're necessarily proud of guys. And I know even Saban was saying that towards the end. He was proud of guys after the South Florida game last year, and that rubbed people the wrong way. I just don't know if the messaging from him is hitting the right way. I think players probably appreciate it, but at the same time, there's tell the truth Sunday, as DeBoer calls it. That's probably happening right now. We're not in those meetings. We're never going to see what's in those meetings. So, who knows exactly what's being said and if it's different than what DeBoer is saying publicly. But, some of that's just a little bit concerning because the ball bouncing one way or the other is not like you're Alabama. Like, you have the most talented team in the country, according to our talent composite. Like, you shouldn't have to worry about the ball bouncing one way or the other. You should be the ones that are bouncing balls in other people's backcourts. That's what I got for you today. But
color of spaghetti and bouncing balls.
Look, I'm on my fourth cup of coffee, whatever it is. I'm just trying. And I'll appreciate a good 11 o'clock game. Like, yesterday was not bad in that regard, but the season gets to you after a while. And look, not to ignore the defense. I know it's that people are really concerned about. Let's not ignore the fact that Jalen Milroe has regressed a little bit here. Mm-hmm. That he threw a bad interception in the end zone. He threw a bad interception, potentially with bad information, on the Cole Adams one. He had a bad intentional grounding penalty that led to a safety. You go back to last week, he had the bad illegal forward pass penalty. Overall, his impact as a rusher, I would say, has diminished a little bit, not in the red zone. The red zone, I think, is still, he's working there. But overall, I think teams are figuring out how to slow him down a little bit. USF did it early in the year. Vandy in South Carolina did a good job of it, where he's not just running wild in the middle of the field. And South Carolina managed to do both that Kirby was talking about. They managed to slow down Milroe as a runner outside of the red zone, and they also managed to slow down Ryan Williams pretty well. That is a little bit of a blueprint I would have to look at too. And the Milroe conversation is really interesting to me because I think if you start losing him a little bit, kind of the strength that he was a couple weeks ago, you add that to the defense, you're in a tough spot.
The thing is, to me, with the offense, it's prolific, but I don't know how much it's helping the defense. I don't know how much they're playing complementary football. They're doing it in the sense that they're scoring points, but they're not winning the time of possession battle when it matters. In fact, in a lot of games, they're just getting outright trounced in that respect. And if your defense is struggling, that's something you can do to help them. Look, like, I know people hate the time of possession statistic, but in that respect, I think it does matter. And again, the inability to get Jam Miller and Justice Haynes going just blows my mind because you're supposed to have the best interior offensive line in the country. Why can't it produce a good running game?
That's a fun transition into the offense. 313 total yards for Alabama, put up obviously 27 points. Jalen Milroe. I think we can safely classify this as probably the first wire-to-wire not great game from Milroe, right? He 16 of 23 passing, only 209 yards, touchdown, 2 picks, also rushed for about 70-ish yards if you adjust for sacks, scored 2 touchdowns as well. He was sacked 4 times. Credit South Carolina, those defensive edge rushers, Kyle Kennard and Dylan Stewart, very, very good. They gave Alabama's offensive line fits virtually all day long. But yeah, to your guys' point, the inability to consistently go to the run game again, it's just weird, isn't it? Like, it's just a weird decision to not commit to it. And it's funny because, like, they had a drive, I believe it was their second touchdown drive 7 plays, 67 yards, touchdown to go up 14-0. They ran each of the final 6 plays of that drive. Like now Milroe had a 27-yard run in the middle of that, which made up about half of, the 54 yards of those 6 runs, but still jam, justice. Like, it was really nice to see them commit to it. And it was like proof that like, oh, hey, South Carolina's run defense is decent, pretty good. We know that the edge rushers are really good, and they were able to run the ball on them consistently. And it's good to see them commit to that because they just don't do it. Why? Why do we think that is? Like, I understand Milroe, the offense is going to go through him. He is a fantastic athlete. And when he's clicking, it is a very fun, explosive offense to watch. I understand all of that. But still, like, when you have that element on your offense, shouldn't you want to lean into it more? Like, why do we think they're not? Mike, I'll throw it to you.
Well, because Kalen DeBoer's offense has always been very pass heavy. They're one of the pass heaviest.
A lot of great podcast titles coming out of you today, Mike. You should drink more cups of coffee more often. Heaviest offense.
Pass heaviest is what I was trying to get at there. I think that's, at the end of the day, what his philosophy is. Like, you ask a general question of whoever, like, what's Kalen DeBoer's offensive philosophy? I think the pass is going to be noted more than the run. And look, there's a lot of different things that have gone into each different game on why they haven't run the ball quite as much. Obviously, Milroe's design runs are going to cut into that. There's just different things that and USC had a good run defense as well coming into this game. They were pretty up there nationally. So I don't know if the opportunity to just run the ball down South Carolina's throat is going to be there. You need to have some success. Like, this first down pass I'm looking at in the third quarter, the one to CJ Dupree, where they fake the handoff to Jam Miller. They throw to CJ Dupree. It's a 7-yard loss. So now you're in a 2nd 17. I guess you can run on 2nd and 17, but you're sort of surrendering to a 3rd and long situation, even with a good run. So they're passing on 2nd down. Then they're passing on 3rd and long. If you don't have a good run on 1st down, then you're passing on 2nd down and you're passing on 3rd down. So there's situational things there that I think kind of add up and create that. It's hard to just put it all in one bucket, but I mean, man, I forgot about this penalty too. I'm just looking through the box score. Remember Alabama got the break in the first quarter when they had the roughing the kicker penalty against Burnham?
Yeah.
And then 2 plays later, they had a stupid penalty themselves when Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams were both lined up on the line of scrimmage. I don't know which one was at fault because we don't know the playbook. Bernard got called for it because he was the inside receiver in that case. But then that puts you in a 1st and 15 situation. Well, what do you do then? You run to Justice Haynes. What do you get? 1 yard. 1 yard, 1st and 15. So then what are you doing on 2nd and 14? You're throwing. What are you doing on 3rd and 9? You're throwing. And guess what? Joe Miller gets sacked for a 9-yard loss. You just kind of get yourself into situations where you're not going to run. And part of that is not running the ball well, puts you in situations where you're not going to run. So it just kind of multiplies and kind of piles on itself a little bit.
I respect everything you just said. Nick Sheridan would say the same thing. He has said the same thing. That games.
No, he wouldn't. He would say, "I appreciate your question," and say absolutely nothing.
He'd appreciate it, and he'd tell you the same thing, that the situations dictate it. You know what I say to that? Bullshit. I say bullshit to that. Running the ball is a philosophy. You run the ball because that's who you are. Does Boise State hesitate to run the ball when there are 9 people in the box? No. That's who they are. They got the best freaking running back on the planet. You just run into the box and figure it out. When you have 2 freshman All-American and at least 1 all-conference, probably 2 all-conference guards, you should be able to find a way. Like, and you got talent in the backfield, and you've got Milroe to play off of. And what do you do when you have, everybody knows this, you got 2 really strong edge rushers. That's the best thing there. They fly up the field, run right at them. I don't know why they don't do it. And I get it. Look, situationally, there are reasons why. But I freaking love a 3-yard gain. Because you know why? 2nd and 7 is better than 2nd and 10. And it tells the defense, it tells those safeties, you better respect coming down into the box. If you're playing Alabama, why would you respect that at all? They're a big play offense. That's what they are. Establish the damn run.
I think the other thing, too, related to running the ball is, I don't know how often you guys play around with the stat broadcast some of the things that they show us here. One of the things is the advanced stats and the rushing success rate, which is something that I like to pay attention to, which basically, how many runs that you committed to were successful based on down and distance. Alabama posted a 56% rushing success rate. So when they ran the ball, and obviously part of that is Jalen Milroe running the ball as well, they did it fairly well on a pretty consistent basis. They just did not consistently go to it or commit to it, which I think it's frustrating because you know how good it can be that they don't commit to it. But also, like, I don't know. Mike's got
Run the damn ball. Everybody's favorite Alabama player, Seth McLaughlin, wore that last year for an offense that could not run the effing ball last year either.
Mm-hmm.
For those who are just listening, Mike showed a picture of Seth McLaughlin wearing a white hat that had in crimson lettering "Run the damn ball" on it. I'm sure
the same one that Tommy Rees wore before last season too, or his wife wore, I think, on a Twitter post, and somebody was writing about, and everybody got excited about how Alabama was going to run the ball last year. It never happened, and it's not happening this year. Different offensive coordinator, different playbook, different backfield. You got rid of Jace McClellan. You got rid of Roydell Williams. You have Jam Miller and Justice Haynes. And look, Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, you look at their averages, they're actually pretty good. They're like 7 and 6. Like Miller's
they run the ball well when they commit to it. The problem is they just don't consistently commit to it.
In some of that, the Western Kentucky game has done a really good job of skewing some stats, I will say. The 63-0 win over them, you had a big long run from Haynes in that game. That has helped their overall stats. And I hate to play this game, but if you do eliminate that game, their stats look a whole lot different, and I think are probably truer to what we're actually seeing. And Milroe's rushing stats aren't as bad as they look because the sacks get factored in.
Which is the dumbest thing college football does, side note. Anyway.
I agree. Look, if Alabama was just running the ball, Jam Miller, Justice Haynes, and that's all they did, and Jalen Milroe mixed in, like, people get mad that they're not using Kendrick Law. Where's Kendrick Law? Like, he benches 425 pounds. Why aren't they using him? Where's Kobe Prentice? Where's Cole Adams?
Why does your stereotypical Alabama fan sound like a slightly smaller Coach O?
Sounds like Grouch from Sesame
Don't get me going with Coach O. But no, people like complain, like, where's Keon Keeley? Like, people would start complaining about everything.
But it is different when you're talking about the running game versus another receiver.
But the fact that you're handing the ball off more to Miller and Haynes necessarily means that you're not putting it in the hands of Apprentice or a Law or these people that people want to see more of.
I don't care.
I don't care personally either, but I do think you have something in Ryan Williams, obviously, and I think Jeremy Bernard too. I think he's still a pretty good receiver. Yes. Granted, I think we had a discussion over the summer about him being a number one wide receiver in the SEC, and I was kind of hesitant about that, and I feel like I'm kind of right about that, but that's a topic for another show. I don't think
who knew that 17-year-old Ryan Williams was going to be the best damn receiver in the SEC?
I think Alabama knew, to be honest.
Yeah,
I think they were like, yeah, we got something here. But look, I think, and to your point, like, maybe the best option for Alabama is to open it up, in which case you are just chucking it up to Ryan Williams and you kind of leave Jam Miller and Justice Haynes by the wayside. So there's different ways to skin the cat here. I don't know if I'm firmly in the camp of they need to run the ball more, because I just still have not been impressed overall with their ability to run the ball.
I think it's fair to Ryan Williams is the sun, the moon, and the stars. This is very well established. Jeremy Bernard is also a very good receiver. I think CJ Dupree, despite his performance this particular game, is coming along a little bit more as a receiving threat, even if he's
getting himself drafted.
Yeah.
Looks like an NFL draft pick the way he's playing right now.
Yeah. You talk about different conversations for a different day. Love to hear you say that. But I think it's important for this offense to establish a consistent run game to just help keep everything else open. Because if they only lean into the run, defenses are just going to load the box and good luck, right? Like, the Ashton Genty is not in that backfield, right? Like, that's just, it's going to make life harder. But they have Ryan Williams. They have Jeremy Bernard. If they can find a way to consistently implement the running backs / the run game into this offense, like, I don't want to say it's going to be unstoppable, but like, it's going to be really hard to defend because of all the different areas on the field that they can and are more than willing to attack you at. And I think that's I don't know. Maybe that's just me wanting to see that more because that would kind of polish off a well-rounded offensive attack. But I don't know. Like, I'm not exactly sure where I was going to finish the thought, but that was at least something else that came to mind with it.
It's not an either or thing. You can do both.
I guess we're still waiting for that offensive performance to see everything come together.
Yep.
I mean, you said it on the show. It's kind of the James Harden offense. It's still Jalen's show at the end of the day. And I think somebody else wrote it on our message board. It's kind of like a bottle cap offense, and Jalen Milrow's the bottle cap.
Yeah.
Like, you're just going to draw it in the sand. I think it was from Sandlot, the movie. It's kind of before my time. I'm not really an 80s movie guy.
80s movie?
Sandlot?
No.
We got to look this up. The Sandlot came out
1993.
93. Yeah, that's basically the 80s. I'm thinking of the Goonies, I think.
1993. That's basically the 80s. You are just rattling off these podcast titles today.
No, I mean, there's no topping Alabama's like a souffle. I mean, we're not going to go.
That's the one I wrote down. Don't you worry.
I just still want to know all the different colors of spaghetti.
I don't know why that came to my mind. I think I was thinking of Eminem's Mom Spaghetti. I don't know why I was thinking of Eminem either. But
I was thinking of Elf, where he packages the spaghetti with syrup and gives it to his mom for lunch.
Oh yeah, that's a 2000s movie. That's probably more my ballpark. But I don't know what the hell we were talking about. But whatever we were talking
offense,
about,
run game being well rounded.
Right, the offense, yeah, it's still Miro's offense. Like, the ball is going to be in his hands a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's going to be a lot of touches for receivers and running backs just because of the way he plays. And until that changes, until Jalen Miro is no longer the quarterback of Alabama, I think that's just going to be the way it is. And to me, the biggest question is, what sort of fallout does that have when Jalen Miro presumably goes to the NFL this offseason? Is there patience from a player like Justice Haynes? Is there patience from Kendrick Law or Emmanuel Henderson, Kobe Prentice? Like, do they say maybe we have more opportunities in this offense post Milrow next year? Or do they say, screw it, I'm going somewhere else where I feel like I can be a featured back? Justice Haynes, it's my junior year. It's time for me to shine. Does he make that sort of decision? Like, we don't know what exactly will go down there, but I would be slightly concerned about the fallout of just having an offense that is so Milrow focused. And then, what does that mean for other players that are looking out for their own careers, which, as we talked about Jaheim Otis last week, is something that I don't fault them for doing.
This is why Mike is so tired. We're 6 games into the season. He's talking about 2025 already.
The season's halfway over. Like, if they don't win the Tennessee game, and then if they lose the Tennessee and LSU games, then it's done.
Yeah.
And that's not that far off. So Courtney Morgan's thinking about it. If Courtney Morgan's thinking about what the next move is, because look, the transfer portal opens December 9th. You can sign guys right away now with the NLI gone away. They're already contacting players in the portal that are going in. Like, you have to be thinking about these things. And that's just where my mind is at. And I think
it wasn't a criticism.
Right. But I'm not saying this would happen. I'm just saying hypothetically, if Justice Haynes was to leave after this season because of his usage this year, which, as we've been talking about, has not been what we expected, the time to change that is now. Again, I just don't know if it's going to change as long as Jalen Miller is their quarterback and the ball is in his hands as much as it is.
We've been mean. We've been critical all pod long. I wanted to end with this thought, at least. By virtue of having an 11 a.m. kick on Saturday, we got to watch a lot of college football. At least I got to watch a lot of college football. There have been a lot of crazy, interesting, wild results, not only this week, but really all season long. I think it was ESPN's Bill Connolly that came out with this stat. Entering this Saturday, 8 top 10 teams had already lost to unranked opponents. That obviously included Alabama. Kind of harken back to that wild 2007 season where I believe entering week 7, 9 top 10 teams had lost to unranked opponents. And I think there was a stretch of like 4 or 5 straight weeks where both number 1 and number 2 went down. Like, just a lot of parity and maybe not a lot of elite teams at the top of the sport that season. I'm not sure if we're quite ready to say that this season is exactly that yet, but consider what happened this Saturday. 7 top 25 teams won either in overtime or by 2 points or fewer. That includes Alabama. That includes Oregon over number 2 Ohio State, 32-31. That includes number 13 LSU over number 9 Ole Miss, 29-26 in overtime. I think it's probably safe to say that there's maybe a little bit more parity to this point in the season, and there's still a lot of ball left in front of Alabama and every other team this year. A lot, I think, it still can be decided. Is there something to be said about the fact that even despite all of that and despite how inconsistent Alabama has played maybe on a week-to-week basis, that midway through the season, they're 5-1, they're 2-1 in SEC play, they have a win over Georgia, that loss to Vanderbilt maybe doesn't look nearly as bad and may not look nearly as bad by the time we get to the end of the season. That win over Wisconsin is looking a little bit better week by week. Is there something to be said about just the idea that they are just still continuing to stack wins despite all the inconsistency that they've played with? Alex, I'll let you start.
No.
All right, Mike, what about you?
No, I don't. I mean, honestly, yes, there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. But I've watched too much of this team. Again, they've shown me how good they can be. And the regression over the last 10 quarters, barely win the Georgia game, barely beat South Carolina, and you lose to Vanderbilt. Look, another program, yeah, you could say these things.
Right.
But again, the standard is the standard. And everybody knows it. Everybody walked in, Kalen DeBoer, eyes wide open. I know what this place is. I know what they expect. And when you have a first-round talent at quarterback and you inherited a Nick Saban team that went all the way to the Rose Bowl and came up that short of going to a national championship, that's what it is. And again, they've shown us glimpses. I hear everything you're saying. They could lose to Tennessee, rebound, somehow make the playoff, but they're a first round out. A lot has to change for me to say they're in that conversation of being anywhere near the elite of college football, even if you're saying that the elite are not as elite as they used to be. Now I'm sounding like Mike, but yeah, that's.
Look, I think the parity that we see is partly a result of scheduling. And we can say, yes, of the top 10 teams right now, there are 5 that have one loss. Clemson has a loss, LSU has a loss, Alabama has a loss, Georgia's a loss, Ohio State has a loss. That's partly because Clemson played Georgia. That's partly because Georgia played Alabama. That's partly because Ohio State played Oregon. And LSU took a loss to USC when they were a highly ranked team as well. So, like, we typically don't have an Alabama-Georgia game in September. Like, Oregon-Ohio State as a conference game has not happened. That's usually a bowl game. So it's a consequence of the way that college football is arranged now, where everybody's in the Big Ten or the SEC. It's a consequence of, team scheduling these big games, the conferences scheduling some of these games earlier to kind of get the TV ratings. And like, there's going to be losses like that will continue to happen. Alabama and Tennessee, there's going to be a loss there. Georgia, Texas, there's going to be a loss there. Does that mean there's parity? I don't know. Like, I think it's just how the season's going to unfold. But I'll say this, like, yes, they are stacking wins, but when you're playing at Alabama's level of ball, which is to say top 10 college football, if you are not stacking wins, something is a big problem. And that's probably the difference between the NFL and college football. And that still exists even with the 12-team playoff. Like, it's still a kind of a battle of attrition as far as not taking a loss. And if you are 4-2 at this point, you're screwed. Like, you're in a bad spot. So if you're not 6-0 or 5-1 right now, like, that's kind of the default. Like, that's the floor for an Alabama. That's a floor for Georgia, for an LSU, for a Tennessee, for an Oregon, for Ohio State, for like even Michigan is a disappointment right now at 4-2. So like, that's expected. Even with the transition, like, you still have enough talent, I think, to be 5-1 and 6-0 or 6-0 right now. So I don't know if I'm going to celebrate that. And I think the signs that we've seen from the defense overall, some of the signs we've seen would concern me about trying to win that battle of attrition in December and bleeding into January when you have to win 4 games in a row or 3 or however you end up getting in. That would concern me against 3 really good teams. And it would concern me in the given moment against the 3 teams that have coming up in their schedule in Tennessee, Missouri, and LSU, 2 of those on the road.
All right. So maybe we don't feel good, even though they continue to stack wins. No, I think that's fair, though. And that's, to be sure, these are pretty high level criticisms because Alabama standards are at the highest level. That's the lens through which we are going to view this team. That's the lens we are always going to view this program. Maybe that's Nick Saban's fault, but it's a well-earned badge of honor. That is why we don't feel good when they, barely beat South Carolina.
It reminds me of a few years ago. They lost at LSU and at Tennessee, and there were all the field stormings. The problem isn't when they storm the field. It's the problem when they beat you and they stop doing it. That's when Alabama falls. So that's the standard has to remain, and I don't think they're going to accept anything less than that.
I mean, if I'm Lane Kiffin, I feel good that LSU just stormed the field after they beat me. Like, hell, I just lost to Kentucky a couple weeks ago. That was a weird field storming. Oregon beating Ohio State was a weird field storming as well. I don't say it's run its course, but it's overused as a celebration to me. Like, Vandy, go ahead and do it. Like, go ahead and tear down the goalpost and walk 3 miles with them. Hell yeah. And by the way, look out for Vandy being on College Game Day in 2 weeks because they have Texas coming in. And Vandy this week has Ball State. As long as they get past Ball State, to me, I think College Game Day is going to be going to Nashville after they go to Austin.
Here's a fun thought. Vandy, assuming they take care of Ball State, will have number 1 Texas, presumably, right? I guess we shouldn't assume that because they still got to play Georgia. And then they get to go, I think they go to Auburn for, they'll have those 2 opportunities back-to-back to get to bowl eligibility.
You know what, Cody? You don't know Ball State.
You're right, I don't. Nor do I want to know Ball State. That's all we've got today, guys. We'll be back probably Tuesday to recap maybe some newsy items. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. We just crossed 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube page, guys. I know that's not a ton, but we're going to celebrate the small wins, even if we don't celebrate Alabama collecting small wins from week to week. Subscribe to Bama 247 on our YouTube page and at 24/7 Sports, where we will have you covered on anything and everything Alabama sports for the remainder of the season. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We'll talk to you all again soon.